Hello community, and welcome back to the second installment in the Threejs Fundamental series, where we are going to use the .GUI library. .GUI is a graphical user interface which can be used with 3D objects in Threejs, and it provides the ability for the programmer to add controls to 3D objects so that the user can interact with these objects through a graphical user interface. And what we will be building today is a button which has the functionality of spawning new cubes onto the screen, which come with their own set of controls. Hence, what you will have at the end of today's tutorial is the ability to program an interactive set of cubes which are spawned through a button. Okay, so let's get right into it. And the first thing that I'm going to draw your attention to is that I've already imported the .GUI library in here in the HTML. This is already reflected in the basic BoxGeometry folder. So if you download BoxGeometry and you want to tinker around with .GUI on your own, you can do that. It's already imported. It's also downloaded here. In case it isn't, just go and npm and search for .GUI. Okay, so this is the code from last time. This, again, is what we built. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to remove the cube from the scene, because what we want to do is we want to have a page which is blank when we start, basically, except for the title. And we want to eventually have a button here which spawns the first cube. So in order to do this, we just remove this part of the code here. And as you can see, the box is now gone. Good. Now, the first thing that I'm going to show you is just how to actually add a .GUI object to your scene. And this is how it works. So, very basic syntax, very easy. This is a new instance of the .GUI constructor. Okay, we can also check if everything is going well in our console. It should, because, yeah, this is all standard console nonsense. But here in the screen we can tell that we have a graphical user interface. We only have no controls so far. We have no folders for our controls, hence there's nothing to close. But if we click on it, it says open and close. So the instantiation is working. And the next thing that we want to do here is we want to think about the controls that we're going to add, because this is really the thing which is interesting about .GUI. What functionality am I going to program into my graphical user interface? So the first thing that we talked about is the functionality to add cubes. Hence, what we're going to do here, we're going to say const controls, and we are going to save our controls in an object. The first functionality is to add the cube. Hence, add cube function const cube, and we're going to call a function which we haven't defined yet called create cube. We're going to leave it at that for now. Because now we have to actually write the function to create the cube. So let's see to it. Create cube. And we are going to have an object named cube, which is going to basically hold all the properties that we need to attribute to the cube. And the first and foremost property that we need to provide here is the mesh property, because as you might remember from last video, we always need to work with a geometry and a material in Threejs. So this is what it's going to look like. I'm just going to copy and paste the color so I don't have to bore you with tedious internet searches. And that is it for now in terms of our create cube function. However, there is one thing that we could do right away. Since we do know that we want to have cubes which rotate again, because we thought it was very entertaining last time, we are simply gonna add the rotation properties right away. So rotation X on the X-axis, and also rotation Y. And another thing that we may attribute right away is color, because what we're going to be doing with the .GUI attributes that we'll be defining is we are going to be adding an extra folder to enable the user to select from a range of colors. So we have to define a starting color. Now, this is different than the color that we are attributing in the mesh basic material property, because this latter color attribute refers to the .GUI interface. again, copying, so it's no bore for you. Okay, well, for now, this looks good. However, we can even take it a step further right away, because one of the concerns which we will have later on in the video is the cubes will appear with an overlap. We can see this here. So we could right away program into the code that the cubes actually appear at different positions on the screen. So what we will be determining here is the position of the mesh at x, y, z. So cube.mesh.position.x equals what? Well, we have to assign a random position, and JavaScript has a nifty math.random function that we can use to implement this idea. These are just values that you are going to have to trust me on. I mean, you could also pick different values, but these work pretty well. And here we can actually just copy this and modify accordingly. Good. So now we have the option to have multiple cubes appear on the screen at random positions when we click on the button in the GUI. However, there is one thing which is missing in our logic, and it's a rather big one, because right now we have no logic to determine what a different cube from another one will constitute. And in order to do this, we are going to have to identify each cube uniquely. So what we can do here in a pretty easy and simple way is define two variables. At the top of the program, one is going to be a cubes variable. It's going to be an empty array. So let cubes empty array. And this is where we are going to push all the new cubes that we create into. And the next thing we are going to add is a variable called nextCubeID and set it to 0. This variable will be incremented every single time that we create a new cube. So the first thing that we should add in our code is in the createCube function, we need a property. Let's put it here and call it ID, which is actually gonna increment the value of next cube ID. So for every cube that we are creating, const cube, we have a property called ID, which is incremented every time a new cube is created. Also, do not make the mistake that I keep making, which is to not use a comma but a semicolon, which is wrong because we're in an object and key value properties are separated through commas. Okay, so we have this, and that is perfectly fine. However, we do not have logic to actually push the cubes into the empty array. So we need to add it here, because we are calling a function add cube, which constitutes the functionality of our button in the GUI. And within this function that we're calling every time that we click, we need to tell our program that we are adding a cube to our collection of cubes. So what we're going to do very simply is cubes.push, and we push cube. This works. However, one thing is actually missing in the controls object, which is that we need to add the mesh to the scene. Scene.add cube.mesh. Right? Because what we're doing here is we are referring to this property in the cube object. So what we do in the controls is we have a property which will correspond to a folder entity in our graphical user interface. This property is assigned to a function value. So whenever we click the button in the GUI, a function call is triggered. This function call defines a cube as a cube object as created in the createCube function, which has a unique ID, an incremental ID. Each cube is pushed into the cubes array and is added as defined in the mesh property, which holds geometry and material properties, to the scene. Yes, so this is pretty straightforward, but you have to, of course, keep track of everything that you're doing. Threejs tends to require a rather layered approach because not a lot of things are abstracted in terms of the structure of the page that you create. With React Free Fiber, a lot of the things that you need to declare in Threejs are abstracted into the canvas component, for example. But with Threejs, you need to be very specific about how to add things to the scene. Good. So the next thing that we should do is actually add the controls to the GUI, because right now this is our situation, which is the initial situation. Nothing has changed. So we're going to write GUI.add controls, add cube, and then we're going to specify a name. So here, after controls, we are referring to the controls as defined in here. So we're adding this object up here, and we are referring specifically to the property of add cube. And in the name, we may say add cube. This is what we will see in the button. So this is what the GUI now shows. If I click, nothing happens. Why does nothing happen? Well, because there's a few steps missing here. So let's go into the create cube function and actually define the logic for each cube, but also return cube, right? Because if we're not returning the object, then nothing can happen in the first place. And look at this. We have cubes which appear at random positions on the screen. Some of them we don't even see. Okay. Let's reload, because there's a few things missing from here. First and foremost, we want the cubes to rotate, right? This is definitely a requisite. So the way that we can do this while keeping a similar approach to what we already have is, since we have an array of cubes now, or potentially we will have an array once we start adding cubes to the scene again, we can do cubes for each, and the single element we will call a cube, and let's use an arrow function here. Cube dot mesh dot rotation. You don't want to select rotation x right away. You actually want to say rotation dot x, because you want to increment the rotation dot x property by the cube dot rotation x property as specified in the object above. So you see the difference here is that here we are accessing the structural properties of the object as defined by Threejs, and here we are incrementing that value associated to the property we are accessing by a property of our own definition, which we defined above. Okay, so, and this is really going to be the same for y. Y and rotation y. Okay, let me see. Yes, this should be fine. Let's check it out in action. Okay, it works. As you can see, the cubes are indeed rotating. Oh, what joy. However, this is still not exactly what we wanted in the end, because there's still some work to do. Okay, refresh. And what we're gonna do here is we're gonna provide each cube with its own controls. And we can do that right here in the createCube function. Remember, we are calling this createCube function in the controls. Hence, we have to determine what controls each cube is going to have in here, because they will be provided as the new cube is spawned, is generated. They are an inherent property of this function call. Of course, you could also create logic which you can place outside of this function call. But in this case, we're going to do it inside. So const cube folder GUI add folder. This is the method. And here we're going to use some interpolation or template literals. We can say cube, and then we are going to provide the cube.id property so that we know which cube we will be manipulating through the graphical user interface. Cube folder dot add cube rotation x dot 1. What we're doing here, by the way, as you can tell, is we're adding minimum and maximum values. We're basically just providing a range within which you can operate in the graphical user interface. And then again, like above, we're gonna add a name for the folder, X rotation, and then we're gonna do the same for the Y axis, rotation Y, and the values are just gonna stay the same, honestly. Okay, dot name Y rotation. Good. Well, we can actually check the progress and see what we've done. Well, here is a bunch of GUI folders, and if we click on one of them, we can see we have an X rotation and a Y rotation that we may manipulate. Let's do that. This cube is not particularly visible. This one is. And there you go. The cube is indeed spinning like crazy. Let's add another one while they're being generated so unfruitfully for purposes of visualization. Okay. Good. So you get the gist. We've created a whole lot of cubes, and we can close the controls altogether. And it's starting to look exactly as we hoped, like the fun cube party that we had anticipated. Everyone's a buzz. However, there's a few things that's missing. And the first thing that is actually missing in here is to modify the title of this file, which is of the heading, I meant Threejs BoxGeometry. I mean, we know it's Threejs. At this point, we do know. BoxGeometry crazy party. Because if it has to be a party, we have to set the mood. Okay. And what we're gonna add now is a cube folder dot add color method. So it's already implemented. This is what I was talking about in my first video. Threejs and the relevant libraries like .GUI, which really goes hand in hand with Threejs. They abstract a lot of the complexity and really have done an amazing job at providing a lot of ready-made methods and functions and objects which you can use right out of the box. It's really cool. So we're gonna say cube because that's the object we're still referring to, color, and here we're gonna work with the onChange method. We can say function I do tend to declare the functions using the function keyword a lot in these tutorials. Not because I'm not a fan of arrow functions. I actually typically use arrow functions in my code a lot. But I think since this is intended to be consumed by beginner programmers and potentially, not just beginner Threejs programmers, but beginner programmers in general, I find it just makes everything a bit more readable. But of course, you could use an arrow function if you so prefer. Good. So in the function, we're going to say cube.mesh.material.color, because of course we're doing nothing if not modifying the color property of the material. That's what we're dealing with. A mesh is a combination of geometry and material, and our cube is just a mesh. Right, so new 3, and here again we have the property dot color, new 3 dot color, not the property but constructor instance, and here we just provide color. Okay, so let me check if there's anything that we might have forgotten, but it doesn't seem to be the case. So let's just see about this crazy BoxGeometry party. Actually, let's use proper grammar here. Crazy BoxGeometry party, yes, that's what I'm talking about. Oh, that's a pretty big cube. And here we've got another one and another one. Let's see what we can do with these cubes. we can spin them as fast as we want. As you can tell, we already have a color property that we are going to use. This is going to be the craziest of them all. And here we can change the color of our cube. This is going to be a blue one. This is going to be a, I'm going to say pink, but I'm a tad colorblind, so don't quote me on that. And this is going to be a green one. And we have managed to create a colorful, crazy box geometry party, which has a rather retro aesthetic. But the point is, it's funny and retro and cool and colorful. And of course, it has controls. So you can pretty much modify everything around the rotation and the color as you wish. You can see here it changes right away. You can also just move it on the slider here to try out different color combinations, and it's overall just a lot of fun to work with. GUIs are a pretty big thing in Threejs and 3D programming because providing interactivity to objects is oftentimes a requirement of the software. And this may be, for reasons more serious than a cube party. Like maybe you're writing a configurator and you have to set certain properties because the client needs to experiment with different shapes and positionings. And he needs to, or they need to be able to create a prototype for their product with your software. Or perhaps you want to provide your clients with the option to create their own objects and then export them in one of the many formats that you can export objects out of your Threejs scene. So for example, if you're writing a software for a client who needs to export objects in a GLF format or whatever, and they need to tinker with them beforehand, they're going to do so with a graphical user interface. So this is why I put it at as a second video in a fundamental series, because it's really important that you familiarize yourself with them. They're plenty handful, and I think they make the whole experience of 3D programming 1,000 times more entertaining. Okay, so as usual, you can find the source code linked in the description. And if you have any questions or if anything's unclear, just drop me a comment in the video. Like and subscribe. I hope you had a great time programming our crazy box geometry party today. And I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.